In today's Ruminations from Among the Bards, I would like to go with you to the traditional poets and storytellers of the region we know as Mesoamerica, southern Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras, and their creation story, which in the Maya language is Popul Vuh. Why look into the Popul Vuh? Because the Maya believed this book enabled them to see forever. It made them into prophets and seers, not just because it showed the creation, but because this was the nature of the divine formation of language as they understood it. Speech and writing gave the intelligence that made humanity able to praise the gods, since language gives humans the ability to see into the minds of the gods. The dawn of life, a creation mythology that is unusually complete and detailed, even in the form we have it. It's something that comes out of deep antiquity, but it's different from any other creation mythology familiar to our literary traditions because it's not connected to the Indo-European myths. It's an imaginative tale, but it also bears marks of the kind of tale we see hints of in so many fragmentary but compelling sketches of Native American mythology. The common themes of this mythology in Native America are the raising of the sky and stars and the coming of the sun, adventures of the hero twins at the dawn of time, with a contest of skill that is the Mesoamerican ball game, itself a cosmic reenaction of the mythology. The gift of corn from the gods to humanity, a uniquely American food staple. And finally, the necessity of sacrifice for the continuity of life. The contribution of Native American culture to American life is so much deeper and widespread than we realize. It's ingrained into our way of life. And yet, without some education on the topic, we hardly even recognize how great is our debt to these ancestors. It's just become a part of the old ways of farming culture that made us who we were before the modern age. So much of the food we eat and the way we cultivate and prepare these foods comes from the beans, squash, peppers, and tomatoes of American horticulture, and especially the corn, not to mention chocolate and vanilla. The early pilgrims on the East Coast would not have survived their first winters if the Native Americans had not shown them how to survive. The Cajun peoples of my home state of Louisiana would not even exist had the Bayou natives not taught them how to live in and around the abundant food sources of the swamps. So that Cajun culture is one half Native American. And then if you think of the percentage of names and places and rivers that are borrowed from Native culture, it is so deeply woven into who we are. It is part of our ancestry. And I think we need to acknowledge and recognize this. Even if we think we have no Native ancestry, we might very well have it anyway. At the same time, I do think we need to frankly admit there are customs in this way of life that we don't understand. The tendency of Native American cultures to be wary of outsiders is probably justified as a need for cultural survival, and it's a reaction to the Anglo-American attempts to destroy it. You could say the same for Spanish America, except that the Spanish in America, in spite of their attempt to overrun native ways, were far more successful in assimilating native ways in Central and South America and in the American Southwest. But another reason to look at this particular Mesoamerican creation tale is in some ways more profound than any other, because it reveals something about the nature of language and the foundation of poetics that goes to the root of what humanity is. And this is the significance of picture writing. And this is connected to the magic of writing an exalted universal perception that is language. The primordial nature of language and poetics is in its sound and meaning. And by primordial, I mean of the original order of creation. We are looking for something in the magical and invocative symbol of a letter that has an ability to invoke spiritual realities. This is in the magical summoning power of writing. And I'm not talking about occult magic, but we're speaking of a hidden power in speech itself and in writing, which is evocative in nature. It has an ability to stimulate noetic understanding, to call upon the divine and beg for the enlightenment of heart and soul. So the question in the study of Maya language and its writing system is not what is poetry, but that language itself is poetry. It is metaphoric, symbolic in essence. Because the Popul Vuh, which means literally the Book of Counsel, was reputed to be a book that opened human understanding to the mysteries of the cosmos and creation. And it did this through the hieroglyphic letters and language of its original form, where these hieroglyphic signs were visionary in nature, so that through them one could see to the limits of the universe. The writing that we will be exploring is in the glyphic signs that make up Mesoamerican writing, specifically the glyphs of the Maya culture. And the fact that no copy of the text of the Popul Vuh in the original glyphic writing survives, as far as we know, adds to the mystique of this text. All that we have, and we're fortunate to have this, is a Latin-style alphabetic script transliteration in the Maya language with an accompanying Spanish translation made by Friar Francisco Jimenez, a missionary to Guatemala in 1703. So this is relatively late in the history of the conquest, which began at the very end of the 15th century. The Spanish Inquisition destroyed so many of the ancient scrolls, especially the Dominican friar Diego de Landa in the Yucatan, destroyed many of them. But also this happened at the burning of the Aztec library in Texcoco, now near Mexico City, so that very few pre-conquest scrolls of writing survived. Just a handful. In fact, most of what we have is what was sent back to Spain by the earliest explorers as evidence of the treasures that could be found in the New World. But there was one found in a cave within the last century, so there could be more. It's important to note that the first Franciscan missionaries to Mexico did not want this burning of the texts, this destruction of native manuscripts, or even of native culture. In fact, several of them were highly educated, capable, and extremely idealistic missionaries who made serious studies of native language, thought, and culture that are still important studies. So the Popul Vuh is the Maya creation story in the form of a relatively late Maya kingdom text. Among the many Maya city-states throughout the period, the Quiche culture and dialect was the active city-state at the time of the conquistadors, and this was in Guatemala and part of the rapid Spanish conquest of Central and South America. So really, this text comes from the final stage of a high civilization in a late form in which the glory of that civilization was already a distant memory. What that strange word means, Popul Vuh, it means book of counsel. Literally, it means the book of the mat, because the woven mat was the royal throne of the Maya people. And this is the translation that we will use. It really is the only choice. It incorporates the most recent understanding of the text, and this understanding improves as the Maya language becomes better understood. And we also have begun to understand the glyphs that we do have on the old monuments and wall paintings, and these help illuminate what the text that we have actually means. So we will be looking also at some of the lovely books produced by Michael Coe, who is the leading archaeologist of Mesoamerica, and some of the other books that are important studies. So a brief introduction to Mesoamerican history is in order. Southern Mexico and Central America were comprised mostly of a history of independent city-states, often at war with one another for dominance. And there were a few wider imperial periods, such as the Aztec Empire, that was the first victim of the Spaniards. It was the ruling power at the time that the Spanish arrived. And the civilized splendor and craftsmanship and beauty of the island city of Tenochtitlan in the middle of Lake Texcoco, where the drained Valley of Mexico City is now, surpassed anything that the Spanish had ever seen, even in the richly cultured Muslim palaces they had just finished conquering in their Spanish homeland. So this was an unbelievably beautiful city, but they also saw evidence of ruined civilizations all around them, no telling how old. Civilization in Mesoamerica began with what we call the Olmec cultures. They were the first to build large cities in the lowland jungles of coastal Veracruz, near the southwest corner of the Gulf of Mexico. They raised large clay mounds in the swamps and built cities on them. And they used the wetter soils below for corn and crops in the dry season. One of the unique features of this Olmec culture is the monumental heads carved in stone wearing the leather helmets of the ball game, so important to Mesoamerican culture. And we'll explain that in a bit. One of the oddest things is the features in these faces, which have large flat noses that look like African people's. And so this is a mystery of who these people were, because there don't seem to be other tribes like that in the Americas anywhere anymore. The Olmec culture broke down just a couple of centuries before the time of Christ. The Maya city-states began later, but not much later, and the more of these cities are dug out of the lowland jungles of Yucatan and Belize and into the mountain highlands of Guatemala, the more we realize that the Maya culture is older than we thought it was. But there are connections to the Olmecs as to the other many cultures in this region. Another important site, which is very old, not as old as the Olmecs, is Teotihuacan, which is just north of Mexico City. This was the first great metropolis of Mesoamerica, far larger than the Olmec cities, and it had suburbs housing different language and cultural tribes from all over Mesoamerica. So it includes an intense variety of languages and cultures that were existing at that time in this region. And it's unusual that there's so many different languages that are completely isolated from each other in such a small area as southern Mexico. But they were separated by mountain pockets and very, very old cultures. These were like the Zapotecs and the Mixe, which later gave their name to the Mexicans, Also the Toltecs with their city Tulan, not too far away from Teotihuacan. And the Toltecs were the people of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, who was remembered as a culture hero. And the Toltecs have always been remembered as the finest craftsmen of all of Mesoamerica. After the fall of the Toltecs, their exiles started to build cities around Lake Texcoco, which was a very large lake where Mexico City is now. And so they began to build cities there, but they also found that there were ruins of older cities already, and we don't really know who they were and may never know who built these earlier cities. And then at the very end of this period, in the last centuries before the conquistadors came, at the very end of the 1400s, just a couple of centuries before that, the Nahuatl peoples migrated from somewhere to the north, perhaps the American Southwest, perhaps northern Mexico. And these are the Nahuatl-speaking tribes that are in the American Southwest still, and as far north as Utah. And the Nahuatl people arrived as wanderers, but they became conquerors. And so they eventually formed a triple alliance of 3 of their cities that formed the Aztec Empire. And alongside all these southern Mexico civilizations, and we have to call them civilizations because they were temple builders and city builders, just to the south of Mexico, we have the Maya cultures that existed at the same time with their own dialects and their own regional customs. So they coexisted with these civilizations that are now in Mexico. So as everywhere else in the ancient world, these city-building peoples were preceded by thousands of years of settled village life in which really exquisite pottery was produced. And these were beautiful storage vessels of all sorts. Some were just for chocolate, and these have been identified by the residue. They made ceramic statuettes and incense burners. And we have now come to appreciate that fine pottery like this is often what survives the longest. And it tells us a lot about the culture and about the religious beliefs that are often interpreted in terms of traditional, very conservative, and long-lived ideas and customs that survived into the later periods we know a little more about. This village life was the result of the agricultural revolution, which in America is corn. Beans and squashes and peppers are also important, but mostly it's centered around corn and the lore of corn. The key to corn is finding, or perhaps breeding, a variety that produces the succulent, useful kernel, and knowing how to preserve and replant the seed, and also how to make it digestible by cooking it in lime ash. And then, like any other grain used for bread, its cultivation and production requires human intervention. And this is considered a gift of the gods and a key aspect of culture. The Popul Vuh preserves all this ancient lore, the wandering of tribes and the miraculous discovery of corn, the gift of the gods. So the Popul Vuh, in the form that we have it, is a relatively late rendition, but it clearly incorporates the mythology common to all Mesoamerican cultures. How do we know this? From the ruins of Izapa. And this is a temple city just inside the southern border of Mexico from the 8th century before Christ. That's when it began to be built. Its culture, its temple building and decorating styles are often interpreted as a transition phase between the end of the Olmec culture and the beginning of Maya culture. It's one of the oldest surviving temple sites that still remains fairly intact, and its stone monuments from that long ago are covered with the images that we find in the Popul Vuh. So even though the only text that we have is from 2.5 millennia later, Yet we know the story was known at least that long ago, and probably long before that. So it's a story of the creation of the world and humanity, from the first raising of the sky to make a place for humanity, and the first rising of the sun preceded by the morning star. And then we have the adventures of the hero twins into the underworld to resurrect their father, the corn god. The Popul Vuh begins like this. Here begins the ancient word. What is meant here by ancient word? This is a phrase that crops up in many places, often referred to in later Aztec writings, something that seems foundational in Mesoamerican thought. What specifically is meant here? Word. This is the first clue to language. The sign for word would be the word. If one drew the glyph according to the ancient rendering, we can assume we could gain insight into the key concept of the entire language. Unfortunately, we don't know what that is in this case. The 18th century transcribers were not providing a glyph-by-glyph translation of the hieroglyphic text. This might not have even made sense to anyone who was not adept at translating all the subtle meanings in these signs, because this was a specialty of the day readers, sort of like astrologers, but these were also the poets and storytellers. But the transcription that we have is a traditional oral storytelling performance of the tale, as the people had always known it, and this was recorded in an alphabetic representation of Maya speech. In other words, it was written down with Latin letters. And this is what Father Jimenez did. He was a Dominican friar in Guatemala, and he copied this text at the beginning of the 18th century and wrote the matching Spanish translation. The text as we have it reads as though it is being narrated out of a picture book. Chapters begin with things like this. This is the great tree of seven macaw. This is the proud bird deity that the hero twins must kill, and now here the boys are hiding under the tree. So the impression that we get is that we're looking at the book, or maybe at the images carved in stone outside a temple or painted in one of the rooms of the temple, because that's where they are depicted, all over the ancient monuments of Mesoamerica. As translated, the text appears as a prose narrative interspersed with chanted lines of poetry, invoking the deities and their actions. So it looks like the Popul Vuh was both recited and sung alternately in performance. But we don't have the original hieroglyphic text that promises such uncanny vision to the one who can read it. It would have been in some form of the logosyllabic script that is the Mayan glyphs. Here, words are represented in two ways interchangeably. They are represented first as logograms, and that is a symbol that represents a thing, a place, a name, or an action. It's a sketched figure that is also a word. But later they became also silograms, which is a symbol that represents a specific consonant and vowel combination in one sign. In other words, it's not made up of vowels and consonants as our letters are, but any sign would be a whole syllable, the consonant and the sound put together. So in this culture, to paint and to write were the same thing. The artists were the writers. There was language in their paintings, which were also often language diagrams. And in these diagrams, speech or language could be represented as a volute emerging from a person's mouth. And that would be like an empty cartouche or cartoon speech bubble, or maybe like an aspiration of vapor. The sign is also a sound, and it's also an idea. because all the phonetic and ideographic elements were gathered together within the sign, the entire syllable, complete and whole in one sign, because language and thought are one. We know that the meaning of the signs changed as the language evolved into different dialects, and this adds to the challenge of decipherment. But even then, they never completely lost their original meaning, which is in the picture itself. A sound remained more than just a sound. It was also an image, an idea, with multiple associations. That is actually the genius of the rebus in the old writings. The Maya syllabary is full of rebuses. What is a rebus? That's where you substitute another thing that sounds identical to the sound you wish to convey. In English, you might draw an I to represent for the sound I. But I, as in the organ, and I, as the personal self, are, in a sense, poetically identical. And they're not just homonyms or even synonyms. They are multiple associations linked metaphorically. This helps one realize how much a marvel language is. Truly, it is the greatest gift of humanity and human culture. Our own alphabet contains remnants of old pictographs. In the Semitic-based alphabet that the Greek inherited, the A, the alpha in the Greek, or the aleph in the Hebrew, was a picture of an ox. The Greeks turned it to point upward for some reason, but if you point it down and extend the cross line across it a bit, you can see the chin, the horns, and the ears of the ox. It's a picture of an ox, but it's also the sound of the breathing or bellowing of an ox. B, Vita, you would think of it as beta in Greek, or Beth in Hebrew. This is the picture of a house, but it's also the sound of striking a wood peg with a mallet to build a house. Alpha, beta, the first two letters, give their name to the alphabet. Each letter was originally an image, an idea, and a sound all at once. At that time, too, each letter was a number. All this has been forgotten in our literate times. We have lost the magic of writing, and that's largely because we no longer associate the act of writing with divine scripture, with a divine act. But here's the Popul Vuh. This is the beginning of the ancient word, here in this place. Here we shall inscribe, we shall plant the ancient word. So here we see already that to write it is to draw it. It is one and the same word in the native language. To plant it here, to inscribe it in stone. And as it says in the text, to write the story is the potential and source for everything that is done in the citadel, everything that is done in the world, in the constellations. It is the demonstration and revelation of the account of how things were put in shadow and brought to life by the maker, the molder, named begetter, bearer. The writers of the narrative accounted for everything and did it, too, as enlightened beings in enlightened words. There again is that mysterious reference word, and next to it, in the form of an idea for light. And again, we wish we could look at the original spelling, as it were, seeing the glyphs in rows and columns with knowledge of their layers of meaning. This is how writing was in the beginning age. Every word is a vision unfolding. Every letter is an illumined mystery, and they make you see forever. This book is called The Light That Came From Beside the Sea. Every translation that has been attempted has been inadequate in one way or another. Too many nuances of meaning have been missed, too much poetic inference unfolding between each word and phrase. Above all, we have lost the direct perception of spiritual realities made possible through the glyphs. This is the beginning of the ancient word, the emergence of the light in the darkness, from rainstorms black as night to days so clear the very end of the earth can be seen. To the Maya people, so long influenced by Catholic ideas, it is in many ways the same story as darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the waters. To deny the close similarities to the Judeo-Christian account, as so many interpreters wish to do, to insist on rejecting it entirely, this is not natural or prudent, and the people have always known this. But there's also many important differences. In the beginning, before man was shaped out of golden maize, that's corn, and honey and water, before the morning star heralded the first rising of the sun, there were adventures that took place above and under the earth. Forces struggled against one another in ball contests and battles. The gods of Mesoamerican mythology are here represented as principles in the cosmic order, vast intelligent forces that inhabit all of creation. But now, in the very beginning of the book, there's an interpolation. It almost looks like a marginal note. We shall write this now as enlightened beings in enlightened words. We shall write about this now amid the preaching of God in Christendom. I am just going to read for a while now. It takes a long performance and account to complete the lighting of all the sky earth. The fourfold siding, fourfold cornering, measuring, fourfold staking, having the cord, stretching the cord in the sky, on the earth, the four sides, the four corners, as it is said, by the Maker, Modeler, Mother, Father of life, of humankind, giver of breath, giver of heart, bearer, upbringer in the light that lasts of those born in the light, begotten in the light, worrier, knower of everything, whatever there is, sky, earth, lake, sea. This is the account. Here it is. Here follow the first words, the first eloquence. Whatever there is that might be is simply not there. Only the pooled water, only the calm sea, only it alone is pooled. Whatever might be is simply not there. Only murmurs, ripples in the dark, in the night. Only the Maker, Modeler alone, sovereign plumed serpent. The bearers, begetters are in the water, a glittering light. They are there. They are enclosed in quetzal feathers, in blue-green. Thus the name plumed serpent. They are the great knowers, great thinkers in their very being. And of course, there is the sky, and there is also the heart of the sky. This is the name of the God as it is spoken. And then came his word. He came here to the sovereign plumed serpent, here in the blackness in the early dawn. He spoke with sovereign plumed serpent, and they taught, then they thought, then they worried. They agreed with each other, they joined their words, their thoughts. Then it was clear, then they reached accord in the light, and then humanity was clear, when they conceived the growth, the generation of trees, of bushes, and the growth of life, of humankind in the blackness, in the early dawn, all because of the heart of sky, named hurricane. Thunderbolt hurricane comes first, the second is newborn thunderbolt, and the third is sudden thunderbolt. So there are three of them, as heart of sky, who came to the sovereign plumed serpent when the dawn of life was conceived. How should the sowing be, and the dawning? Who is to be the provider, nurturer? Let it be this way. Think about it. This water should be removed, emptied out for the formation of the earth's own plate and platform. Then should come the sowing, the dawning of the sky earth. But there will be no high days, no bright praise for our work, our design, until the rise of the human world, the human design, they said. And then the earth arose because of them. It was simply their word that brought it forth. For the forming of the earth, they said, earth. It arose suddenly, just like a cloud, like a mist, now forming, unfolding. Then the mountains were separated from the water. All at once the great mountains came forth. By their genius alone, by their cutting edge alone, they carried out the conception of the mountain plain, whose face grew instant groves of cypress and pine. And the plumed serpent was pleased with this. It was good that you came, heart of sky, hurricane, and newborn thunderbolt, sudden thunderbolt. Our work, our design will turn out well, they said. And the earth was formed first, the mountain plain. The channels of water were separated. Their branches wound their ways among the mountains. The waters were divided when the great mountains appeared. Such was the formation of the earth when it was brought forth by the heart of sky, heart of earth, as they are called, since they were the first to think of it. The sky was set apart, and the earth was set apart in the midst of the waters. Such was their plan when they thought, when they worried about the completion of their work. Now they planned the animals of the mountains, all the guardians of the forests, creatures of the mountains, the deer, birds, pumas, jaguars, serpents, rattlesnakes, fared lances, guardians of the bushes. So this is the account from the Popul Vuh at the very beginning, when there was nothing but sea and sky, but they appeared identical, not easy to distinguish. But the great intelligence is there, inert in the still darkness, where the blue-green of the sea suggests the brilliance of quetzal feathers, which is a very bright, bloomed sort of parrot in that area. Therefore, the sovereign plumed serpent, the maker and modeler, is in the sea and the sky. He is called Heart of the Sky, named Hurricane. Within him, a trinity of thunderbolts. Thunderbolt Hurricane, newborn thunderbolt, sudden thunderbolt. Now in the story we hear these three discussing among themselves the sowing and the dawning, the formation of land separated from the water, and the making of creatures. You can see an implied relationship between word and thunder represented as a voice. Humanity was the last creation, as though the cosmos was arranged as a place for humanity to exist. And there were several failed experiments to create a creature capable of praising the gods, as though this is the culmination of creation, and the purpose for human existence is to praise the gods, to perceive divinity. The failed experiments resulted in ages that were destroyed because they were imperfect, without an intelligent creature who could see the nature of the gods. But then they finally succeeded. And this happened through a process of adventures among other gods. So there were two gods, a grandfather god and a grandmother god, and they were the ones who shaped all these creatures that were to become human. And they had two sons, and one was the maize god, and the other was his twin. One Hanapu and seven Hanapu were their names. And the maize god, one Hanapu, also had two sons, also twins, and these are the hero twins in the Mesoamerican story. Now the maize god, one Hanapu, and his twin, seven Hanapu, went to the western end of the continent by the Pacific Ocean and engaged in a ball game. Back and forth went the ball while the moon and planets changed places, bouncing among the stars in the nets of the Milky Way against the shining walls of the night sky. The orientation and dimensions of the ball courts throughout Mesoamerica, one of the most important facts of their cosmology, was always represented in their temple planning. So this court at the western end of the land happened to be on the road to the underworld, and the lords of the underworld were annoyed by the noise of the game. They came and challenged the twins to a contest in their own realm. And so the two, one Hanapu and seven Hanapu, went over the edge of the world and entered the darkness in the middle belt of the Milky Way, that dark buckle in the belt of light under the feet of Sagittarius. In the underworld ball game, the head of one of the twins was taken off and became the bouncing ball. Now, it's interesting that the lords of death are not known until this time, until they are disturbed by the joy of the game. And up until this time, the ball game is not associated with sacrifice. It is simply a contest of skill, joyful and peaceful. Falcon, the messenger of Hurricane, came to watch. Hurricane is associated with the obsidian mirror. So mirrors in Mesoamerica were made of obsidian, and because they were dark and not always clear, there was an association with the dark, swirling sky and these dim reflections that would be seen in the shining obsidian mirror. So the obsidian mirror was an instrument of discerning prophecy. And so this was Hurricane, and Falcon was his messenger, and we can assume that Falcon is watching for destiny as it's going to be revealed in the game. Now, in the underworld, when the head of one Hanapu is taken off and used for the ball, it's then thrown away and hung in a calabash tree. And this is a tree of gourds, and the gourd is the head of the maize god. But then a daughter of the lords of death passed under that tree, and the head spit into her hand, and she became pregnant. And when it was known that she was pregnant, she had to leave the underworld, and she went to live with the grandmother, the mother of the maize god, and the two boys, the hero twins, were born of this daughter of the lords of the underworld. All this while, there was a hint of dawn in the sky, but not yet a sunrise in the earth. And then the two boys, the hero twins, needed to accomplish a series of adventures before humanity can be created. They have to rid the world of monsters. This is a common theme in Native American myths of the hero twins. And then they have to rescue their father, the maize god, from the underworld. Now there is a magnificent bird, a bird god, with splendid gems for teeth and very proud in his nature. His name is Seven Macaw. Numbers are often put together with names for the names of people and for things, and these numbers represent a place in the Mesoamerican calendar that we'll explain later. Mesoamerican studies call this bird, Seven Macaw, the great bird deity, and he appears all over Mesoamerica. He's very proud of his shining teeth made of precious jewels, and he's proud of his shining metal breastplate and of the gleaming reflections that flash from all of these. But because there is not yet a sun or moon, he proclaims himself the sun and moon, the source of light, because of these reflections that come from his person. And the two boys, the hero twins, because they are gods, they perceive that the bird's boasting is a great sin to magnify himself as though he were the all-powerful radiance of the sun and moon. And so the boys conspire to destroy him. They hide under his tree and shoot him with a blowgun. Now, the great bird deity has two sons who are also monsters, and their names are Earthquake and Volcano. And the boys have to kill these monsters too. They have to subdue Earthquake and Volcano, which are powerful forces in southern Mexico, which is a land of great volcanic mountain ranges across the continent from the Gulf to the Pacific. And all of this is done to make a place on Earth for the creation of humanity. Now, after destroying Earthquake and Volcano, the monsters, and turning them into mountains and stones, the two boys discover their father's ballgame equipment hidden in the rafters of their home. And these are thick protective headgear and body gear and gloves and thigh greaves for striking the ball. They learn from their mother and their grandmother of their father's fate in the underworld, and so they go to rescue him and bring him back to life. They go find the ball court at the western end of the land. They sweep it out, begin to play, and again disturb the lords of death, again are challenged to a game in the underworld, go down to the underworld, submit to the same challenges, which includes a ball game against the lords of death and other trials. But they trick their way through, they replace their father's head on his body, and they bring him up out of the underworld. And this whole story is about the resurrection of the corn in springtime after its burial in the earth, and about how to store corn over the winter and when to replant. Now that corn has been given to the world, humanity can be born. And the first men were like gods. They could see to the four corners of the heavens and the earth. Like gods, they marked out reference points for the movements of the heavens, the four directions between the four corners of the universe. They were creatures who could speak, who could invoke the names of the Trinity of Hurricane and the plumed serpent, a creature he was who had the language of the gods. So the purpose of the Popul Vuh narrative here is to distinguish the marvelous human creature from the animals, from the mud mixture of primordial elements of earth and water, and even from those animals that are most like men, the monkeys, but are not men who can speak. And what is it that distinguishes humanity? It is here in the Book of Counsel. This is the crowning gift: speech, language, intelligence, so that humans could praise and worship the divinity. And all of it is told with calendrical signs in the language of the cosmos, the speech of creation, in which is the mysterious hidden speech of the Creator. But because the first humans were too much like the gods, with unlimited sight and insight, this was taken away from them, and they became able only to see what was right in front of them. But they were given this book of prophecy so that by looking into the book, they could see as far as they used to be able to see. And this is the nature of language and of the calendar, which investigates the movements and cycles of the cosmos. It is the prophetic intelligence. So we can assume that the hieroglyphic text showed clearly how the mythological story is an allegory of astronomical cycles, a pictographic chronicle of the movements of the heavens and their meaning according to the season, because that's clearly what the written text is. It's a mythical explanation of astronomical processions, the origins of the calendar described as intelligent forces expressing divine will and purpose in battle and conflict and adventurous movement. The disappearance of the hero twins under the earth into the underworld chronicles the disappearance of the evening star and its later appearance as the morning star. The episodes correspond to the meaning of the day signs in this cycle. The bouncing ball refers to the cycles of planets. The ball game is a contest of heroic adventures, making a place in the cosmos for the creation man. And that is why it is called the Book of Counsel, with the clear narrative of the primordial calendar and creation of the cosmos. One could look into the days and see what they mean. We know now that many of the pictographs of the Southwest desert, carved into rocks all over the deserts, do the same thing. They're carved into rocks aligned with the appearance of heavenly bodies in the vast observations of desert horizons. And the mythology of the desert seems similar at times, not always, but sometimes they do. When we see carved in the petroglyphs of New Mexico and Arizona and Utah, things like step pyramids, the horned serpent with wings, the medicine bundle of Spider Woman, mirror shields and sacrificial knives, corn imagery, the morning star, all these are common elements in Mesoamerican glyphs. Now, there's many pictographs in the Southwest Desert that we don't know what they mean, but there are these also. So what we see in the first parts of this book is the true Book of Counsel in its early form up to the rising of the sun when men know what they are. The latter part of the narrative of the Popul Vuh describes how the Quiche Maya rulers came in possession of this book from a pilgrimage to a city of a previous great kingdom, probably in the lowlands of the Yucatan Peninsula, or possibly some other long-ago city. It's clear to scholars now that the origins of Mesoamerican writing are connected to the creation of the calendar as a method of recording cycles of time. The Mesoamerican calendar is much more complex than our calendar, which is fairly simple, a calendar of days, weeks, and months. The solar calendar is as important in Mesoamerica as we are used to thinking of it, and the lunar cycles also. But all the Semitic cultures that gave rise to our understanding of time, the Mesopotamian, Phoenician, Hebrew, and Greek cultures, are all based on a cycle of 7-day weeks rotating through month and year, and we take this for granted. The ancient Americas don't have a 7-day week. We're also used to a 10-based system of counting, and this comes to us actually from ancient India, along with the insertion of 0 as a marker of tens and hundreds and thousands and so on. And the Americas don't exactly have that, but they do have counting in a 5-based number system, and this multiplies to 10 and 20. So 5 and 10 do seem to be universal, and why is that? And it's probably because ancient peoples began counting on their fingers and toes. A solar calendar in the Mesoamerican realms is 365 days, but it's made of 20-day months, of which there were 18. And this makes 360 days, plus there were 5 days at the end that were considered unlucky because during those 5 days, the heavenly realms came down and mixed in earth, and anything unexpected could happen, and people were wary of beginning anything during those times. So there's a 365-day solar calendar similar to ours, but there's also a second revolving calendar at the same time, and it's made up of cycles of 13 days and of 20 days that are interlocking. You've got 1 through 13 revolving on one side, identified by number, and you have a cycle of 20 on the other side, each of these identified by the name of a totem animal or mythological figure. And these spin against each other like 2 wheels with spokes interchanged, so that when the number 1 comes around, it lines up with a different one of the 20 than it was aligned to before, because 13 doesn't align with 20. So the result is that there are each number rotating through each day sign. That's 13 times 20 equals 260. So there's also this strange 260-day calendar. And why 260 days? It's still a bit of a mystery, but scholars have wondered if it's connected somehow to the human gestational period. Anyway, the 2 calendars would not line up again in their interrevolutions, and we were speaking of the 365-day calendar and the 260-day calendar. They would not come back to the same place in relation to each other for 52 years. And these units of 52 years are also included in an even longer cycle that's called the long count, and it measured vast periods of time. What really matters most beyond this lunar month and solar year is the cycle of Venus as the morning and evening star. This is primary throughout the Americas. The cycle of the rising and setting of Venus as the morning star takes 263 days. After that, there are 50 days when Venus cannot be seen at all. Then it appears in the evening sky for another 263 days, and then it disappears for another 8 days. Then it appears again in the morning sky, and the entire period of Venus, therefore, takes 584 days. The relation of 365, the solar year, to 584, the Venus cycle, is a ratio of 5 to 8. That means that every 8 years, the rising and setting of Venus occurs at the same time of the year. The risings and settings of all of the planets move along the horizon. You can see this in the sun, how the sun moves north. The rising point moves north in the summer and then farther south in the winter. And all the planets do the same thing, but they have different markers along the horizon. The rising and setting points of Venus could be marked on the horizon at an observatory. And near the shore of Yucatan Peninsula, there is a spectacular temple site that we call Chichen Itza. It was once part of a major Maya city of the late period of Maya history. It has temples with beautifully carved stone facades, a great step pyramid, a huge ball court for the ceremonial games, many other temples, platforms, and raised roads. And there's also a small stone domed observatory with windows aligned to the significant risings and settings of Venus. So we know that the ancient Maya people knew all of these cycles, all of these risings and settings, and were particularly paying attention to the movements of Venus. And we've seen that the disappearance of the hero twins in the underworld and their reappearance after a time with the resurrected maize god, their father, is represented by the cycle of Venus, which was also its association as a herald of the coming sunrise. So these adventures of Venus as the morning star paved the way for the rising of the sun at the beginning of the age. The name signs of the 20 days associated with gods and their totem animals were further qualified by matching to the numbers 1 through 13, and that's why names of people who are usually named after the day they were born has a number and a name. This gives a sense of order to time, and this is what gave rise to a language system in writing in pictographic form emerging from the signs of the calendar. And it shows us picture writing as the basis of language. The Maya glyphs have only recently been deciphered within the last 50 years with help from Maya-speaking natives, and more is still being deciphered even now. And even within the last decade, scholars are beginning to realize that the murals and stone and temple carvings from all over Mesoamerica among peoples of completely different language groups from the earliest times share the common imagery that we see in the Maya glyphs. And although represented in different drawing styles, it is looking more and more like all of these paintings and carvings that we thought were merely decorative are also writing. They actually show names, titles, places, and dates. This was discovered in a recent study of wall paintings in Teotihuacan, which was the first great metropolis of Mesoamerica from the time of Christ through the first centuries afterwards. This great city had influence over the whole region of Mesoamerica, and it housed artisans from all regions and language groups that lived in their own suburbs working in the city. And many of these drawings are of gods and totem animals, and we often see them adorning the heads of rulers and priests as towering, complex headdresses and masks worn while officiating over rituals connected to the complexities of the calendar. These masks are also language. It is the language of summoning the powers of the heavens. But there is something eerie about these masks and the manner in which they swallow the human feature, and especially in what we see in the murals that the priests who are wearing these masks are doing. And so we're going to ruminate and possibly complain a little bit about that in part 2 of this presentation on the Popul Vuh.